Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our new series of Redistricting Radar. We haven't had an episode since earlier this year when we covered, I think, Maine and Maryland, but we're back now with three brand new states, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Minnesota. And we also have our new Redistricting Radar tool on our website to incorporate into our show. So without further ado, I'll throw it over to Eric to explain that.
We launched last month. We launched the Redistricting Radar tool on our website. This kind of gives a rough idea of what all 50 states could look like. Keep them, or the ones with multiple districts. Keep in mind these are based on the 2018 numbers, so some states will have more or less as needed. For the most part, this won't impact the ratings we're showing tonight. And obviously, those trends can be incorporated. We're going to do a whole redraw of these maps once all of the 2020 numbers are out. That way we can fully update and adjust based on everything right now. But these are all estimates anyway. So I put a link to the Redistricting Radar portion of the page here, and I'm going to highlight it so you can see it on the chat. And so now I guess we'll kind of just get into the discussion here, which is really centering on tonight. We're centering on three states: Massachusetts, which is one of the larger states. Is actually the largest state without a single Republican in its delegation. Then we're going to do Michigan and we're going to do Minnesota, which are going to be two states that are very interesting to look at in redistricting for reasons we'll explain. We'll explain shortly. So first off, we're going to go into Massachusetts, and I'll go ahead and explain like I usually do the rules here. So Massachusetts is an interesting state. It's a very, very Democratic state, but it's not quite California level. There are pockets of Republican strength, but they're distributed evenly throughout the state for the most part. So it's actually pretty hard for Republicans, even under a perfectly fair map, a map drawn with no partisan intent. It's very difficult to get Republican seats.
And just a brief point to add as well, in Massachusetts, because the support is spread out, you may have a seat where the PVI is Republican in Massachusetts that could theoretically, at least most likely, still elect a Democrat. Whereas in Connecticut, you could draw a district that could be relatively even that would probably elect a Republican, significantly outrunning Trump by a couple points.
Yeah, the Massachusetts Democratic Party is very strong for a reason. Our contributor, Armin Thomas, who has been on the show before, wrote an excellent article about the dynamics of the Massachusetts Democratic Party, which basically encompasses everyone from these upscale liberals in Boston, minorities, and working class white voters, which still remain a strong constituency in the Democratic Party in Massachusetts. So the broad and short of it is the current map is not necessarily a fair map. But even under a fair map, Republicans would maybe get two competitive seats, and they're not certainly would not be guaranteed to get either. Not likely to get either. But the current rules, Massachusetts, the legislature draws the map, and the governor can veto. The governor is Charlie Baker, is a Republican. The problem is the legislature is about 80% Democratic in both houses, maybe a little bit more. So the legislature can override anything Charlie Baker does. Now, the last cycle in Massachusetts, and I'll show you what progress they have made, is that they have reduced the share of gerrymandering that has come out of the state. And I do want to applaud them for it because it is a genuinely good move they have done. So if you look at some of the previous maps, these are ugly monstrosities. You have seats here like 4, 10, 9, all taking in parts of Boston. You have this one seat, 3, stretching all the way through the center of the state down to the coast. And then these disgusting one, which kind of just carries in parts of Springfield and some other areas around here. Not a great map. The 2010, they decided to make a fairer map. They genuinely made a concerted effort to make the map at least look reasonably adherent to the to how the state actually votes, or at least how it will be a relatively fair manner. So the current map is this. There are 9 Democrats and there are no Republicans. Republicans have come close to flipping a couple seats in the state this cycle. They've run competitive races in, I believe, the 6th and in the 9th. Both of those they've run. These are the two. Historically, the 6th was more Republican because Essex County has tended to be more of a Republican area down ballot. And then 9th is a lot of white working class voters that tend to vote more Republican down ballot as well. The 2nd has become more of a Republican less of a Democratic-leaning seat because of Republican shifts in the center of Massachusetts, this working-class area around Worcester, but it draws enough into the Berkshires that the incumbent is not really at risk here. So big things to keep an eye on here. One is the Berkshires are split. You'll notice right here, the counties of Franklin and Hampshire are both split, split down the middle, and this gives more of a Democratic vote to the incumbent in this district, as well as Worcester, which is a very, very Democratic city. The county itself of Worcester is one of the more competitive counties in Massachusetts. In fact, Hamden as well has become more Republican in recent years. Donald Trump was the first Republican to hit 42% here since 1988. Relatively good performance for the former president there. Other ones right here: the third, Fitchburg, Lowell, Haverdale. The sixth takes in parts of Essex, parts of here. Fifth is these really, really liberal areas, suburban areas around Boston. Uh, the eighth is the seventh, I believe, is the VRA seat. It's not technically a VRA seat, but it was designed to possibly elect a minority candidate, which it did in Ayanna Pressley. And then the fourth, eighth, and ninth. The fourth takes in parts of the working class counties, right around here, as well as Boston suburbs, really, really liberal Boston suburbs. The eighth is home of Massachusetts' most conservative Democrat, although he will tell you in his own terms that that's like going to the Kenyan track team and finding the slowest one there. Like they're all really liberal. He's just the least liberal of the bunch. And then finally got the ninth here, which just kind of balances out these working class areas with these more liberal areas in Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, all sorts of these other areas around here, which are very Democratic, especially Provincetown, which is one of the most Democratic cities in the state. So I'll just go through the representatives here real quick, and then we'll show our maps. The first is represented by Richard Neal. He's from Springfield. He represented Springfield back when this was a seat that stretched the center of the state. He's faced competitive primaries recently. Most recently, Alex Morse ran a spirited campaign against him.
He's also Ways and Means Chair, which is one of the most
Ways and
important
Means
House
Chair.
committees. Tax Writing Policy Committee.
Yeah. Neal is like the typical Irish Catholic Massachusetts Democrat. He used to be actually fairly pro-life, at least on some issues. He's not as much anymore. And so he's not necessarily conservative, but liberals have wanted to replace him, the Ways and Means Chair, with an actual progressive. And given
it might
the
also
Berkshires,
be interesting to note that he's also the dean, not just of the Massachusetts delegation, but of the entire New England congressional delegation. He's the current longest serving member.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Again, he's the relic of a bygone age in Massachusetts, to kind of put it that way. And he represents one of the more liberal areas. Granted, it's tied with Hamden and some other more conservative areas in Worcester. Jim McGovern is a more liberal representative. He represents the more Berkshire portions of the seat as well as Worcester. But you'll notice the seat is much more competitive. This is because Worcester County has trended right in recent years by a fairly large margin. Not enough to become a competitive county, but enough to where Democrats can't be assured a comfortable victory. So it's one of the more competitive areas of the state. The third is represented by Lori Trahan. I don't know what much to say about her. Maybe someone else has that.
She's relatively new to the House. If you knew, 2018, her primary election that she won, obviously since Massachusetts doesn't have instant runoffs or blanket primaries, she won her primary with about 29% of the vote by literally a couple hundred votes. It was incredibly close.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in some trivia, I would go read about that primary. She barely won.
And then Jake Auchincloss here in the fourth, who has been touted as a moderate conservative Democrat. He's really more of a normal Massachusetts Democrat, but again, another primary winner who won a narrow race with a plurality of votes, a small plurality of votes at that. Massachusetts tends to have these crowded primaries. Yeah, Massachusetts has crowded primaries because, again, it's a Democratic state, and representatives are going to serve there for a long time. I mean, when all these seats are D+9, they're basically the same partisanship, even though these are all vastly different portions of the state. Worcester is not the same as Essex, and it's not the same as the Boston suburbs. Catherine Clark represents these northern suburban areas, a very liberal representative. Seth Moulton, former presidential candidate, represents a bunch of Essex County right here. You notice this seat is only D+6. Republicans actually made several spirited campaigns to win this seat over. Richard Tassay, who was the former, I believe, minority leader in the Senate, as well as a lieutenant governor candidate for Charlie Baker in 2010, one of the most prominent gay conservative candidates in 2012 and 2014, narrowly lost a race, several races in this. So I believe that his second was much more decisive than his first bid. Ayanna Pressley in Boston, you know who she is. The seat is the more minority areas of Boston and its suburbs. She's very liberal, although out of the squad, she's probably the least socialist of the squad. But that's not saying much. She is still
And
a
just
very,
for
very progressive.
the viewers all know, but she was famously elected in the 2018 primary when she beat Mike Capuano, who again was one of the more traditional branded Massachusetts
Mhm.
Democrats at the time.
Yeah,
And this is right after AOC took out Joe Crowley, so a high-profile primary year that ultimately was notable for the Democrats. And she's part of the squad, as Eric mentioned.
yeah. Stephen Lynch in the eighth, I mentioned he's the more conservative one. I believe he has some anti-abortion leanings. He's very much not in favor of free trade, and he's the most moderate conservative member of the delegation. Although again, probably in the top 100 most liberal representatives in the House, aside from a few issues. And then the ninth is Bill Keating. He's had a firm hold on the fourth or on the ninth, which is the most Republican leaning seat in the state. But he's had a pretty firm hold on this for a while. It's again the Nantucket portion, Martha's Vineyard. These areas just render the seat a little bit too liberal to win. With that, we'll go into the maps. I'm going to go ahead and show the election daily maps first in the redistricting radar, and then we'll show the ones that Harrison and Nick have made. Keep in mind those are probably based on a little bit newer data than the redistricting radar ones, but it just give you a good idea of what we're looking at here. This is our fair map of Massachusetts, and you can see kind of right there what the vote totals would look like. Here is what it would look like if you just looked at the map as a whole. Notice here it looks a little bit different. The second is now mostly central Massachusetts. It's the most competitive portion of the state at this point. And then these all look a little bit different. The ninth is now kind of contained. The eighth, same thing right around here. The seventh is now Boston contained. The fourth is these inner suburbs, Essex, and I believe the sixth district, and then these other ones around here. Much more compact map that does not split a lot of towns. If you look at the actual results here, though, you'll notice these are all Democratic seats. The second is by far the most competitive, and Joe Biden still won it by 10 points. In fact, it's mathematically impossible to draw a map in which Donald Trump has won a seat in Massachusetts. It's that Democratic. Sorry for my Republican friends who are watching or for our listeners, but it's just a very, very bad state for Republicans for a variety of reasons. But this does become more competitive than it is right now. The ninth, these areas saw in particular a lot of reversion to Democrats in these years, much more Democratic in these cycles, even though Plymouth County is traditionally the most Republican county out of the bunch right now. It's actually voted against Elizabeth Warren in 2018. Republicans looked like they were making some inroads there, and then it kind of reversed. The rest of these are all very Democratic. Even the sixth, which is the traditionally more Republican, at least favorable to Republicans. Here, it's just not. I mean, these are all pretty uniform. R plus D plus 30 plus 40 plus 50 plus 20. There's just not a whole lot here for Republicans, unfortunately. If you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, obviously that's fantastic that there's no Republican seats in a map of Massachusetts. Now, keep in mind, this one uses different data. This one uses 2016 data. So this is drawn to just have competitive seats. So the second right here is an abomination of a district that stretches throughout all of the most Republican areas of the state. It still only votes for Trump by 8 and would have voted for Biden. The same for the 6 parts of Essex, more these competitive central Massachusetts portions. It's still Biden plus or Clinton plus 8. It's just not really a great state for Republicans for a variety of reasons. The Democratic gerrymander, very similar to the current map. In fact, I believe it's identical. It's a least changed map to the current one. And it just makes sure these areas that are, these more Republican areas are divided, the few Republican areas. And then finally, the compact shape map, which it's pretty similar to the current one, just geographically divided into portions. So those are the redistricting radar maps. You're welcome to go and explore them yourself on the site. I'll go ahead and throw it to Nick to show his map, and then Harrison will show his map as well, or his maps, and then we'll move on to our next state.
Sure, and I hope you don't mind if I just add a couple of things onto the background of this, just a couple of things that I think might be worth mentioning. Sorry, let me just share my screen quickly. So yeah, this won't take too long. Let me It doesn't screen.
And I find Massachusetts to be fascinating for a lot of reasons. I mean, just recently, you had that conservative Democrat who was elected to the state, I believe it was the state house. And when we mean conservative Democrat, like he's literally a Trump supporter, posting boomer memes on Facebook.
Yeah, no, I saw that story.
Like that's the degree to which Massachusetts really is a one-party state. Aside from Charlie Baker, who was his own thing, the Republicans are just inept. They're not really capable of competing.
Exactly. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, yes, I can see it.
Yeah. Okay, so starting off with the thing that Eric mentioned about the old maps compared to the new maps. Now, the old maps weren't actually something that I had really looked at until a couple of weeks ago, and I was really struck by how strange some of these shapes were. And yeah, it's really striking. But like I was more surprised by how that carried on to the next map. It's actually funny because Massachusetts used to have 10 districts. It's now dropped down to 9 because of population reasons. Like you know how it is. The district that actually got eliminated was this one in the far western corner of the state. This first district, and after that, in terms of numbering, it sort of just dropped. Like second district became the first. Third became the second. There are a couple of exceptions. I think the fourth is similar. The sixth, the same. But yeah, so going on to, I'm gonna open them up in different tabs. Hang on, bear with me. So I always found it easy when I do this. Yeah, so the second district here, that was the one that Richie Neal represented. This contains Springfield, a bunch of different countries in this part of the state, and this is the new district that he represents. Looks kind of different, but it contains a lot of the same population centers.
Mainly Springfield and Amherst.
Yeah, McGovern represented this district here. I think that contains some of Worcester. I don't really know how that's split, but I believe that McGovern lives in Worcester now. I don't know if he lived back then, but wrong tab. But he represents this one now. I could go on and on, but a lot of them you can skip right onto my onto my map. Don't want to bring that up just yet. Yeah, as you can see, some of the districts look very similar. But this fourth district, for instance, this is one that's sort of always triggered me a bit because these areas in the southern part of the state aren't similar to the Boston suburbs at all. And
and these are the Boston suburbs. These are the liberal, wealthy, affluent suburbs of Boston.
Exactly.
Paired in with like white working class areas near the coast. It's not the same thing at all.
Yeah, exactly. I believe back then this was represented by Barney Frank.
And he had his toughest race in 2010, right before the seat was demolished. He had a very, very tough race that year. Tough by Massachusetts. Yeah, tough by Massachusetts standards is like winning by 10. The Red Wave almost hit Massachusetts that year in terms of what it would almost accomplish. But yeah, that was the only competitive race Barney Frank ever faced in his career. In Congress was that the Red Wave year.
And that's really interesting as well because you haven't really it's got these Boston suburbs which is supposed to anchor the district down, and
he only won by 10.5%. Yeah, 10.5% win for him that year.
So, yeah. But what I was going to say about this, apart from that, most of the districts are the same. Sixth is fairly similar. The seventh, old seventh, and the new fifth. That's the one that Ed Markey represented. Now Catherine Clark represents it because Ed Markey was elected to the Senate. He was actually a long-time representative in the House. He gave up all of his seniority when he ran for a Senate special election, which he actually almost lost. It's a funny. He didn't really almost lose it by Massachusetts.
It was close. 10 points. It was a 10-point win. It was a 10-point win. That's a close race in Massachusetts standards. Even like an 18-point win for Democrats is like a close race by Massachusetts standards.
Exactly. Yeah. Like take Elizabeth Warren's 2018 victory, for instance. Not very impressive.
Or the race between Romney and Kennedy, which is touted as close. Kennedy won that by 18 points, and it was touted as a close race because it's Massachusetts.
Exactly, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think I just about covered everything in the old map. The new map, like I hear a lot like there's basically two sides to this argument. People on the left will say, well, people on the right will say that Massachusetts is gerrymandered. People on the left will say, oh, it's impossible to draw Republicans any districts in Massachusetts. I say both. I honestly say that I'm honestly not too fond of this map. I think it has a lot of flaws. You can't draw Republicans any districts, but you can draw one that, at least in some timeline, would be competitive. Like the first and second. That's one of my biggest problems with this map because what you have Western Mass is fairly liberal, like very liberal for considering it's rural, particularly around the Berkshires, particularly around this area here. But you've got pockets of Republican support, which exists around this area here, any area of Worcester County that doesn't contain Worcester itself, and like surrounding areas. You have like light red areas there, and like sort of little bits around like Springfield and Holyoke, which aren't part of Springfield and Holyoke.
The smaller towns, like most towns in the county now, except for Amherst and for Springfield, are Republican at this point, although they're much smaller than those towns
Exactly.
or than those larger cities.
Yeah, sure. And what they did with this map is that they split them very cleanly, I guess. The first district contains some of these red areas here. Second district stretches up to some of these blue areas here, and contains Worcester itself. And both of these districts end up being Democratic leading by like 20 or 30 points. And the other one that I don't really like is the fourth district again because I've already explained that because it just doesn't really have much in common. These southern areas with the northern areas. Funnily enough, though, Jake Auchincloss, the candidate who represents it now, he was the one who he pretty much won because of these southern areas, even though he's from Newton. And my theory is that if the district is drawn differently in 2022, he'd be smart to move to the south of the state because he just represents it better. He does better among those sorts of people. And yeah, like you can call him a carpetbagger if he wants, but it's probably the smart move for him, to be honest. So yeah, I just want to move on to my map. So I'm going to get DRA up right here. Now this is a map using 2019 populations. I updated it a couple of days ago, and this is my idea of what a fair map in Massachusetts would look like. I'm going to get up a few results here because they're good to look at. Governor 2014 is one that I quite like because that's the only one where you don't have either Republicans or Democrats winning all the districts, because that was a competitive election, right? That was Republican plus like 3 or something like that. Baker only won it by like 3 points against Martha Coakley. Attorney General, that was a Democratic landslide. Don't really care about that too much. Senator 2018 is interesting. Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, Warren is really, really weak among that faction of Massachusetts Democrats, which is the working class voter. She's really, really weak with them.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just sort of take a quick overview of all the districts. First district is a compact district in Western Mass, and it's safely Democratic. Voted for Clinton by 30 points, voted for Martha Coakley in 2014, and yeah, generally votes pretty solidly to the left of the state, even to the left of the state, considering it's a deep blue state. Second is I would say the most competitive district in the state. It's Clinton plus 7, which is and it wouldn't have even, if you actually take Worcester out of the district. I tried this before. If you take Worcester out of the district, it becomes almost dead even in a 2016 race. Yeah, it's sort of similar in a way to the district that Eric showed, which was supposed to be a fair map. I think his would be like, I don't know that the map on the redistricting radar, I don't think was I don't think it contained Worcester, but I could be wrong.
It's split Worcester. It put Worcester with, I think, more of those inner Boston areas. That was more of a population thing than of
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention it earlier, is that, I mean, you've probably said this before with other New England states, but counties do not matter. If you look at the county lines, I did not look at the counties at all, and they are all over the place. The only one
They're useless bodies. They literally don't have any role in Massachusetts.
Exactly. Yeah, I think only these six here, I think they're the only ones that actually have any local government at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like the other ones don't even have. Yeah. Like they're just census units.
Yeah, the thing that matters in New England is towns. That's where the government's structured after, is the towns.
Exactly. I actually made a Massachusetts map a while ago that didn't split a single town or city. But
nice.
For this one, I think I got lucky with the Boston area. That was very difficult to do. For this one, I just focused on population equality. DRA has added a new feature where you can do block level editing, which helps you make maps that have these sorts of population deviations, which is good. Mm-hmm. So moving on. Yeah, I wanted to mention that because of this Essex County split. Like this on the face of it wouldn't really seem to make much sense. Like because you're splitting Essex County between the 3rd and the 6th, and you're moving some of the 6th into this one right here. I can't remember what it's called. And I mean, I think you'll find if you know the area that it would make some sense. I spent a summer in the North Shore, actually, which is another name for this sort of area in Essex County. I have a lot of family there, so I'd say I am quite familiar with the area, and I can confirm that these cities around the northwestern corner of the county don't really go well with the rest of the North Shore. I wouldn't call them the North Shore at all, actually. Yeah, I mean this actually goes into Suffolk County. I can't remember if it's Suffolk or Norfolk. I get confused between them. Yeah, Suffolk County, which contains places like Revere and Chelsea, I think, as well as of course like Boston itself. So 3rd district, nothing really special about that. It just contains those like northern cities like near New Hampshire. 4th district. This is something I had a conversation with people on Twitter about. Like I wanted to find out a good way to draw the 4th district, and this is what they told me. This really like consolidates all of those.
Because you put Brockton in, which is a major working class city. One of the anchors of that area, so that makes sense regionally.
Like Fall River, New Bedford, and Brockton, and does not go anywhere near the Boston suburbs because we don't like that. We don't want that. Moving on to the 5th. The 5th is more suburban. I think the current one stretches a bit. This one isn't too different. Like this is Catherine Clark's territory. 6th district. Yeah, very similar to the current 6th district. And I touched on this a bit. Like this did become competitive earlier. This was before 2014. This was represented by John Tierney, who had a sort of scandal with his family, with his wife, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And he almost got beaten by, as Eric said, Richard Tisset, who was very strong candidate for his time. He was very charismatic, very and had a lot of crossover appeal. Nearly beat Tierney, and I'd say he definitely would have beaten Tierney in 2014 if Tierney hadn't been primaried by Seth Moulton, who represents the district to this day and ran for president in 2020. R.I.P. That was
the Boston. I think the Boston area ones are going to be the most interesting to see in redraws because those are going to be they could be substantially different depending on if they keep the current, I guess, minority mander. I don't know what the proper term for it would be.
I'm not sure. This could be questionable because it's actually majority white.
But the current seat is majority white too. I mean, they're both white seats, and a minority coalition seat is not really a thing under the VRA. That's a dirty little secret. It's not really a thing they care about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean the current map, I think that stretches down to one of these towns here, and some of the Irish parts of Boston, those go to the 8th district. This 8th district is basically a completely new district. I think it has quite little overlap with the current 8th. It's sort of one that takes in some of those Boston suburban areas that were previously in the 4th, some of them in the 2nd and the 3rd. It doesn't really have much overlap with the current 8th, so I don't think Stephen Lynch would be very happy with this map. But
no, he'd be doomed unless he ran on the 9th.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I'd say the best. This is quite similar to the 3rd, actually. It's sort of Boston exurbs, as well as some immediate suburbs here. And finally, the 9th. This is the South Shore. This keeps together all those coastal towns south of Boston, and this is still like relatively competitive. Like not one that will Republicans will be winning anytime soon, but still relatively to this day is quite competitive. And as a whole. And the other thing I wanted to go over was some results from recent elections. So it's currently got 2016 data on, and this is what it looks like. It's what you'd expect. First, third, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, all safe Democratic. 4th and 9th, those southern ones are sort of more competitive, and then the second one is by far the most competitive. I think Jim McGovern is someone who Republicans could definitely target if they found a strong enough candidate, I think, because Jim McGovern is very much in the left flank of the party. He was I think he's like a kind of well-known and respected figure, so I don't think he'd be too vulnerable. But in the right circumstances, I think you could maybe beat him in a good Republican year. I don't really know though. And then the 4th and the 9th, same thing. Well, not really the same thing, but I don't think the incumbents would be too vulnerable. But who knows? We don't know what things will be like in 10 years. 10 years from now.
Yeah.
What are the Senate
well
2018 numbers in the district?
Yeah.
What are the Senate 2018 numbers in the 2nd district?
Senate 2018. Yeah, I'll do that next. That's interesting.
Very
interesting. I think the 9th is actually the closest district in that one.
I think you could actually see a situation in the next decade where the 2nd, if you take out Worcester, where the 2nd, the white working class trends just continue, or the 2nd and Hamden become more competitive, even though Hamden's going to be always hamstrung by the fact that it has Springfield, it has Holyoke. Those are not going to be competitive areas, but the 2nd, if you can counter Worcester, you can make it a competitive county at least.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, I mean, it's not a Democratic stronghold at this point.
I mean, as you like, I think I should have showed this map all along. This is the part of the lane. This is 2018.
Yeah.
You'll
notice. You'll see all the red. Yeah.
Here. And this is a Warren +5 district. Not even that. 4.6. So yeah, it depends how they draw it. But I mean, I'm not expecting a completely fair map, but
yeah. So really good stuff. Yeah.
I like to remain optimistic about the possibility of fair maps.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't look good if they send a horrible map to Baker and it gets vetoed. They don't really honestly even need to do anything to hold all their seats, so there's really no reason to think they go and do a string mander or something. But yeah, really good stuff. I'm going to go ahead and throw it to Harrison as well to show his map, and then we'll move on to Michigan, which is another really interesting state for a different reason.
Sure, yeah.
It's another one of those states where we're going to be a lot of attention is going to be paid to Michigan. But we'll show Harrison's Massachusetts map and see how it differs, compares to the ones that we've shown before. Massachusetts is one of my favorite states to look at just because of the dynamics are so unique in the state.
Yep. So my map essentially is just a cleaned up version of the current map. I do not personally like the way the current map looks, but I'm not entirely opposed to the relative design of it. So this is roughly just a cleaner version of the current map, a new approach I took to it. So I'm going to approach it with partisan colors off, but I'll also remove county labels, and you have the background up as well, so you can see the cities. So the first district, as we said, is Ways and Means Chair Richard Neal's district, the dean of the delegation, a traditional Massachusetts Democrat. He's from Springfield, so he would be fine in this first district. Heavily Democratic. It's the Berkshires, one of the few remaining rural areas in this country, I should say, that still votes reliably for the Democrats. The second district nearby, again, similar shape, still includes Worcester, which is the home of Jim McGovern. So McGovern would be fine in this district as well. And if we look at second, slightly more Republican than the first district, but still very safely in the Democratic column if you look at those presidential numbers. Moving over to the third district, the biggest city in the district is easily Lowell. Lori Tran's from Westford, which is also in the district. It's not on the map, but the township is right here. It's a little to the southeast of Lowell, but it's still within Middlesex County. So you're good there on that front. And this district is about as Democratic, not a little more Democratic than the Berkshire district. So again, not one of the districts Republicans will be looking at in terms of being competitive in. The fourth district, I really like my fourth here. I purposely cleaned up the fourth district to make it look neater. Not only is it now neater in terms of its extension up to the Boston suburbs, areas like Newton, if you see Newton up here, that's actually where Jake Auchincloss lives. We also no longer have an extension down into Bristol County. So we just have a seat that's based predominantly in the southeastern portion of Worcester County, Norfolk County, as well as a little bit up here, as you can see, of Middlesex County, predominantly Newton. So that seat, if we look here, again, safe Democratic. The suburbs surrounding Boston are very, very, very Democratic. And if I do this, you should be able to see. Oops. Hold on. Yeah. So ultimately, the parts of this district in Middlesex and the northernmost portions of Norfolk, basically the closer you get to Boston, that's where you'll find the most Democratic parts of this district. The portion in the southern part of Norfolk County, you see lighter blue, and the portion you see actually in Worcester County, very close between the Republicans and the Democrats. I don't have the actual county data up for that portion, but I presume it would be more competitive than the other portions. So just in the interest of time, I'll keep going. Let me put on not partisan lean yet. Sorry about that. Move over to the fifth district. Fifth district incumbent is Catherine Clark, who's held it since Ed Markey went up to the Senate, and she lives in Melrose. Melrose is right there, so she's safe in this district, which, again, it's one of the collar districts around Boston, heavily, heavily Democratic. The sixth district up here, historically one of the competitive seats in the district, still reliably Democratic, and Seth Moulton is from Salem, which is right here along the North Shore, so he is fine in the sixth district. The seventh district is Ayanna Pressley's seat in Boston. I tried to make the seat more minority coalition, quote unquote, so I reduced the white percentage and tried to have a healthy percentage of Black and Hispanic population in the district, which ultimately, if you combine all the minority groups in the district, makes it a majority minority seat, or at least if you combine in general all the groups together, not of a specific group, of course, because it's still plurality white, but safe Democratic, centered around Boston. The eighth district is the Stephen Lynch district. The eighth district is also the most competitive district in the state. Donald Trump only lost it by about 10 points in 2016. And it was a district that was actually very close in the 2018 Senate race, largely because we saw Elizabeth Warren consistently underperforming with working class Democrats who vote for candidates like Stephen Lynch. So Lynch would be fine in that 8th district. Don't be fooled. Someone like Lynch would well outrun the total you see here. So although it's the most competitive district, Republicans are screwed over by the fact that it's represented by someone who greatly appeals to many of the Democrats who have crossed over to vote for Republicans there in recent years. And the 9th district is the last one. The Keating district essentially runs all the way down the coast, taking up most of, except for Taunton, most of Bristol that used to be in the 4th district, which is now the Auchincloss district. And that territory runs through Dukes, Nantucket, Barnstable County, and the southernmost portions of Plymouth. So again, this seat is also somewhat competitive. It was only Clinton plus 13 in 2016. And if we look at this map with partisan lean on, you can see, with the 2016 presidential numbers and with the 2018 Senate numbers, all the districts vote Democratic. Ultimately, though, 8th is the most competitive, 9th is the second most competitive. The second district could be considered competitive, although the Republicans are still below 40% there. And then the remainder of the districts are very safely in the Democratic column. So again, just a nice cleaned up version of the current map here. And that is my map. And without further ado, I think it's time we move on to Michigan.
Yep. And so we'll go ahead and talk about Michigan. It's an interesting state. Right now it has 14 House districts. It's projected to go to 13 after reapportionment, which means it will be losing a district. This is not the first time it's lost a district. In fact, I believe it lost a district last decade as well. It went from if it didn't, it came very close. It was they had 15, then they have 14. Now they'll have 13 districts. Newly for Michigan is they have an independent redistricting commission, which means the maps will be drawn by a commission. It has 15 members. Or actually, it has a divide of Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, unaffiliated people. You have to have buy-in from all three factions to approve the map, which means it's probably going to be more competitive than the current map, which actually isn't unproportional, even though it is a gerrymander, if you actually look at how things go. So I'll go ahead and show the map real quick, and then we'll talk about the representatives. So this is a pretty unusual map because it's definitely a compact mander in a lot of ways. There are some things here that Democrats really like about this map and things they would not like. Obviously, the first has the Upper Peninsula, these areas. That's going to happen. The second has in these Republican areas through here, and these Dutch areas like Ottawa, and then parts of Grand Rapids. 3 takes in some counties, takes in part of Grand Rapids, which is becoming more Democratic, along with some other counties around it. You'll notice a lot of these shapes are kind of mathematical, but that's to keep towns from being split. Townships. It's actually so while there's some of these weird angles, they actually went out of their way to make sure, even though this was a gerrymander, that it didn't necessarily wantonly split towns or anything. So good on them, I guess. The fourth is the Central Michigan seat, very, very Republican. The fifth is basically drawn. It's kind of an ancestral dummy mander because a competitively drawn fifth now would be very competitive. It would actually be close to the median national vote, but this current one draws in more Democratic areas and is more Democratic. The sixth right here is a competitive seat. It has Kalamazoo, other areas around here. The seventh is an unusual seat. It has parts of the Ann Arbor County of Washtenaw County, as well as some other counties around it. These are suburban or exurban Detroit counties and central Michigan counties that are Republican at this point. The eighth is a very weird seat. It has Lansing, East Lansing, which is the capital of Michigan, Lansing. It has Livingston County, which is a very rural Republican county, and then it has the most rural Republican portion of Oakland. And it balances out to a seat that's marginally Republican at this point. The ninth district right here was drawn as a Democratic seat. Again, it's kind of a dummy-mander. A compact version of the seat would be more competitive. Right now it's represented by Andy Levin, who is a very liberal Democrat. But it could be more competitive with a fairer map, although that would hurt other Republican seats. The 10th is the Mitten. It's the most Republican portion of Michigan. Very Republican. Not much more to say other than that it's the Mitten. 11th is the suburban seat, which again draws in is these weird shapes are to keep towns from being split. It's actually a Democratic leaning seat now, but when it was drawn, it was leaning Republican. The 12th is a white seat. It draws in Ann Arbor and then parts of Wayne County. And then 13 and 14 right here are the VRA African American seats, which may be coming to question this next decade as we determine whether or not it will get a second VRA seat. It's actually pretty challenging to do. The incumbents, Jack Bergman in the first, this is an ancestrally Democratic seat, was Democratic as recently as 2010, but it's since become a Republican stronghold as the Upper Peninsula has become one. Bill Huizenga from Holland, again, you can tell from his last name, he's Dutch. You can tell from where he's from. It's the Dutch area of Michigan, very Republican area traditionally. Peter Mayer from Grand Rapids, one of the more exciting freshman Republicans on the national stage, gained attention for really running a really strong campaign, running ahead of Trump. We interviewed him. Joe Szymanski interviewed him before the election. He won. He since voted to impeach Donald Trump, and he's also tried to be more of a moderate, bipartisan voice in Congress, succeeding Justin Amash, who is a firebrand libertarian representative. John Molinar is in the Midland seat. Dan Kildee is in the the Mid Michigan district right over here, the Democratic one. Fred Upton is retiring, one of the deans of the delegation. Tim Walberg is again in this 7th district, which is a very weird area. Alyssa Slotkin, one of the few Democrats in a Trump district. She managed to hold on to her seat even as Donald Trump won it. Andy Levin, as I mentioned before. Lisa McClain, the new representative for the 10th district. Haley Stevens, who represents the 11th, which is Republican leaning here, but it's a Democratic seat now for all intents and purposes. Debbie Dingell, and then Rashida Tlaib, probably the most liberal member of the squad, and then Brenda Lawrence, who is in the 14th district. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and show kind of our map of Michigan, the fair map of Michigan here. Again, it's drawn. Michigan's a tough state to draw, but I think we did a pretty good job of it. Republicans get these 4 really strong seats, actually 5 of them. No, yeah, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 really strong rural exurban seats, as well as the 6th. These 3 in the middle are all very competitive. The Grand Rapids seat, Kent County, Michigan 3, Michigan 4, which is Lansing, Mid-Michigan, some other areas, and then the 5th. All of these would be within 3 points for Joe Biden. Very, very competitive districts. As I mentioned with the 9th, this one here is only Democrat plus 5. Andy Levin would have actually a pretty tough time here in a Republican year, given how liberal of a representative he is. Zoom into here. You'll notice, actually, that I didn't zoom in. That was BS. Oakland County gets a Michigan 8 shifts entirely into Oakland County. Michigan 11 takes in Ann Arbor, some of these areas, and these 2 seats right here take in parts of the Detroit area. I believe 12 is plurality white, but if you counted Middle Eastern and North African as a separate census category, it would be majority minority district. Currently, there's a lot of Muslim voters, Arab Muslims that live in the Detroit area that are counted by the census as being white, but they're not really in the same sense as another one. That's why you had the possibility of this new census category of MENA, which ultimately did not happen. And then the other ones are pretty simple. Republican gerrymander. Democrats get 3 seats in Detroit, and Republicans get everything else. The Democratic one is Republicans are packed into 4 seats, and then they just kind of crack Detroit, Grand Rapids, go up here into this new county up here, which has become more Republican, this tourist area up in the north, and then compact by shape, which is a more favorable Republican map, and gets an 8th, which is actually pretty similar to Alyssa Slotkin's current 8th. But now with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and throw it this time to Harrison to show his map of Michigan. And then we'll go to Nick as well to show his, and then we'll finally move on to Minnesota, which will be our final state of the night.
All right, so here's my Michigan map. It is an older map, so I haven't updated it yet. So we're just working off of 2010 population stuff and 2016 presidential data. I also have up the 2018 Senate and gubernatorial results to show a better Democratic performance in the state. But ultimately, I think this map is pretty fair if you look at it. In general, you have 4 safe Republican seats, the UP seat 1, then you have 4, 6, and 10, all of which, again, are fairly safe seats. If we look at the Democrats, the Democrats have safe seats in 13, 12, 9, and 3. So both parties pretty much start off with 4 safe seats. So 4 safe Republican seats, 4 safe Democratic seats. In addition to that, you also have districts 5 and 14, both of which aren't necessarily safe for their respective parties, but are certainly going to allow that party to be favored to win. The 5th district does take in Saginaw, and in addition to that, it takes in a lot of Republican rural counties as well in central Michigan. And ultimately, that results in a district that Donald Trump won, well, as you can see here, by about 18 points in the last election in 2016. The 2020 data isn't in here yet, but even if you look at stronger Democratic performances in 2018 and for Senate and for governor, even then, the 5th district, as you can see, it still voted for John James against Debbie Stabenow, and it still voted for Bill Schuette against Gretchen Whitmer in that governor's race. So overall, the 5th district, very, very Democratic. Again, the odds of a Democrat flipping the 5th district, pretty low. So we can count that with the Republicans. So we're at 5 Republican seats, and the Democrats have a similar situation in 14. It's not as Democratic as 3, which is the Ann Arbor-based seat and also includes Kalamazoo. It's obviously not going to be as Democratic as 13, which is the 87% Black Central Detroit minority seat, or in districts 9 and 12, both of which surround the center of Detroit. But 14, again, still fairly Democratic. So if we look back at 2016, Hillary Clinton still won the seat by 7 points. And that margin only went up in the governor's race and in the Senate race, with Stabenow and Whitmer both winning it by double digits. So quickly, we'll move on here to our close seats. So essentially, 5 Republican seats, 5 Democratic seats, and 4 of the seats on this map are considered very competitive seats. So I'll go through each of those because ultimately, in most electoral situations, these 4 competitive seats, that's where you're going to see the race is decided. So the 2nd district, let's start off there. The 2nd district is centered around Grand Rapids. And again, here you see that this district was about a 5-point Trump win in 2016. But given the improvements that we saw in and around Grand Rapids for Joe Biden this time around, I would expect this district to be a lot closer. As you can see, the district did narrowly vote for Gretchen Whitmer in 2018. John James also had a close race in this district, winning it by about 1.8%. So in most situations, this 2nd district would be a toss-up, to put it simply. I mean, if we look at the county labels here, 1 second, please. Go over to county. The Ottawa portion is heavily Republican, and the portion below Muskegon is heavily Republican. So ultimately, the center of Kent County, Grand Rapids, that's the Democratic part of the district. That's where most of the population is, and that's what's keeping it a competitive district as well. So if we move on now, turn this off. So again, a toss-up seat there could really go either way, to be honest. The trends are good for the Democrats long term, but a Republican could still, very much win that seat. And let's move on real quick. 2 districts 7 and 8. The 7th district is a nice competitive district south of Detroit and Ann Arbor, and the 7th district was won by about 5 points or so by Trump in 2016. Again, if the Democratic win is good statewide, as it was in the Senate race and the gubernatorial race in 2018, Democrats carried this district as well. Same thing with the 8th up here. The 8th district was more Republican. This is definitely the most Republican out of the Republican-leaning toss-up seats. It was carried by Trump by about 6 points or so. And the final one is the 11th here, which a Republican could theoretically win. It was only Clinton plus 3, but certainly the hardest to win for a Republican out of these 3 toss-up seats. So in an ideal year, you pretty much end up with a Democratic majority of 1 or a Republican majority of 1 ultimately. So it's a fairly fair map, and I'm interested to see if I update it for 2020 numbers when those come out, how that looks.
Yep, and we'll go ahead and now throw it to Nick, who will show his map, and then we'll go into to our final state, which is, as we said before, Minnesota.
Sorry, I was muted. Great, I'll start that now. Okay, so I guess I'll jump right into it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. There we go.
Cool. Nice. So this is sort of a temporary Michigan map I have. I'm still working on perfecting the map. I still think this has like a few flaws, but I'm working on it. Michigan is definitely a difficult state to draw. But yeah, this is what I've got right now. This is the latest map I drew. I drew it a couple of weeks ago, and this is something that I'd imagine an independent commission might want to draw. This is shaded by 2016 results. So as it stands, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 Clinton districts and 9 Trump districts, which doesn't really seem like an accurate representation of the state. But as you can see, there are quite a lot of competitive districts. And yeah, I just want to go by the district by district. I don't want to take too long because I know we want to get moving. First district actually, the current one has like a straight line going through the middle of the state. This one sort of goes down to the more rural parts of the state because it doesn't include can't remember what that city there is called. But yeah, it's more rural. That's what I'm trying to get at. Second district. Second district is interesting. One of the things I try to do here is combine college towns. So one of the college towns, the map isn't working. I think it's Muskegon. Yeah, Muskegon and Mount Pleasant. Those are two major college towns in the state, aside from Ann Arbor, and it also stretches up north to Grand Traverse. This is this whole area, like northwest Michigan, as the Lower Peninsula goes. These are generally wealthy people, like relatively, like people on Lake Michigan tend to be quite wealthy and kind of upper class, like upper middle class, like relatively to the more working class Lake Huron, I think it is. I don't know what the names of the lakes are, but yeah. So second contains all of those areas. Third, some Democrats might be a bit outraged about the way I drew this district, because by going into Holland County, which is this one right here, Holland County was once the most Republican part of the state. It was the by far the county that John McCain won by the largest margin, but it has actually swung heavily to the left, as most of the state has swung to the right. And I thought that Kent and Holland sort of deserve their own district. It's kind of taking in the Grand Rapids metro, and I mean, another way of doing it is actually getting the whole of Holland and then filling the rest of Kent County like Harrison did. I actually find that quite an interesting technique of doing it. But yeah, I drew it like this. This voted for Clinton by about 10. Sorry, it voted for Trump by about 10 points in 2016, but it would have moved a lot to the left. It would have voted for Trump by only about 3 points this year. So the fourth district is actually, the current fourth district is eliminated. I think John Muhlenar, who represents the district at the moment, I think he's toast, really. I don't think there's any way of preserving his district. He lives in Midland. I honestly think I have a sort of running joke about this on Twitter, but I think the best option for him would be to run for state senate. Yeah, it's been done before. I think that
his seat is going to be in trouble, to put it lightly.
It is, yeah. So fourth district, this was actually be an open seat. I don't think any incumbent lives here, and it is very swingy. It voted for Trump by 3 points. Would have, I think, undoubtedly voted for Biden. I mean, it would have been close in 2018, but I think Biden would have won it. It contains a lot of Alyssa Slotkin's district, because it does contain Lansing. Because in the current map, what I like to do with these maps is keep these 3 Lansing metro counties together: Ingham, Eaton, and Clinton. They're all in different districts at the moment, but I like to keep them in the same district. Ooh, my laptop's frozen. Yeah, and this creates a fairly competitive seat. Alyssa Slotkin, she lives in the Detroit metro at the moment, but she could potentially move if she wanted a more winnable district. Like she'd probably win re-election. But yeah, I think this is probably the bellwether of the state, as it were. Fifth district, actually quite close in 2016. This is actually one of the biggest swings. One of the areas that swung the most from 2012 to 2016. It voted for Romney by like 20 points. Sorry, not Romney. It voted for Obama by like 20 points. And would have swung to the left. I think this is an obvious way of drawing this district, because it contains Flint and what they call the Tri-Cities, which is Saginaw, Bay City. Saginaw? I think it's pronounced Saginaw, but I don't know how it's pronounced. But yeah, it seems like the obvious way to draw this district, and I think this is how it will be drawn. Moving on, 6th district, kind of similar to the 6th district now, except the one major difference is that it keeps Kalamazoo and I keep forgetting the names of the cities. Battle Creek, yeah, it keeps those two together, because I'm told that they're sort of a community of interest. So that works. 7th, sort of a space filler. Don't really know what the 7th is, but I'm pretty sure it works. 8th is interesting. 8th is suburban. Would be the home district of Alyssa Slotkin, so she could run there if she wants. But it would be very tough because it is very ancestrally Republican, at least. And although it's moving to the left, it's probably not moving fast enough for her to win there. So she'd probably be better off moving to the 4th. 9th is interesting. 9th is very close. Contains a lot of what's called Macomb County, which is very, very working class suburban, and it moves into Oakland County a bit. It ends up being quite close. So a lot of competitive districts in this map, actually. You got about 3 or 4. 10th, very similar to the 10th now, contains this like thumb area, deeply Republican area, sort of always has been. And 11th and 13th are the African American majority districts. I mean, actually, they're not quite majority, but I mean, they are.
Close enough.
Actually, I just noticed. But yeah, you can see that this actually moves into Dearborn. So even though Eric's pretty much gone into it in detail, Dearborn is officially heavily white, but most of those white, quote unquote, most of those white people are actually Middle Eastern Americans, which I don't know how well it works. I'm not really too familiar with.
Yeah, there was a debate a while back during the Obama administration over whether or not to classify MENA, Middle Eastern North African, as a separate census category apart from white, which that ultimately didn't amount to anything. Some conservatives had some resistance to it. I don't understand why, because it frankly would have been better for classification. But regardless, we're stuck with this now, and I think that would be considered a factor certainly when drawing the districts.
Yeah, and the last district is the 12th, very similar to the 12th at the moment. It combines Ann Arbor with this area of completely blanking, whatever the name of that county is that contains Detroit. I honestly can't remember what it's called now. I don't know why I'm so forgetful today, but it contains these parts that some Michiganders like to call downriver, which is sort of downstream of the Detroit River, and contains some of those working class, working class areas south of Detroit. And I wouldn't really say it goes too well with Ann Arbor, but nothing really goes well with Ann Arbor. That's a big problem with college towns. Like they seem to be like islands. They don't really go well with anything.
Yeah, so, it's like the problem we have in North Carolina, which is the Appalachian State, Boone, and then is always going to be in a red seat, pretty much. Even though it's a college town, it's a Democratic area. At this point, it's just going to be too separate for the rest of the state. And Ann Arbor is the peak example of that because it doesn't really belong with Wayne, but it also doesn't belong with the Republican areas around it, where it would overwhelm their votes and really doesn't match their needs.
Wayne County, that was it.
Yeah, but we'll go ahead and go into Minnesota now, which is our last state we're going to be discussing. Harrison's going to have to leave in a little bit, but I'm going to try to get him through before we do that, and then we can close off normally, going through them at a normal speed. So Minnesota is a fascinating state. I think it's the only state in the country currently with a split legislature. The state Senate is controlled by Republicans, while the state House is controlled by Democrats. In fact, actually, the state Senate has 2 Democrats now who coalition, or former Democrats who are independents now, in coalition with the Republicans. So they already had, I believe, a 1-seat buffer. Now it's a 3-seat buffer, relatively speaking. So the governor as well is a Democrat. So Tim Walz, former representative from the 1st District. And so what that means for Minnesota is that unless they agree on a map, then it's going to have to go to, the governor can veto it, but it's going to have to go to a judicial commission who will draw the map. The big debate in Minnesota is whether there will be 8 districts or whether there will be 7. Right now, the delegation is split evenly 4-4, 4 Republicans representing the rural portions of the state, and then 4 Democrats representing the urban and suburban portions of Minnesota. If it goes to 7 seats, Republicans would probably be primed to benefit from that. Granted, they would see probably Michelle Fischbach and Tom Emmer see their seats merge, but at the same time, the second district will become much more competitive. And it would be actually pretty likely that Republicans could hold a majority of seats in Minnesota while losing the popular vote if the map was drawn compactly and based on normal standards of communities of interest and whatnot. So I'll go ahead and show the current map, which is it's a pretty solid map. I have issues with it, but overall this was decided by the judicial panel, and so this is what it looks like. So let's go ahead and zoom in. The first is this southern tier of Minnesota. This is a bunch of rural areas as well as Rochester, one of the largest cities in the area. We did an episode of the Map Room on this map a while back. A Republican-leaning area at this point, although it used to be represented by Democrats. The second has some of these suburban counties of the Minneapolis area, as well as a couple of counties that aren't really suburban Minneapolis in it. It balances out to a marginally Democratic seat, but it's been a very competitive swing district. The third used to be a very Republican district, but now it's become, as the suburban realignment has happened, it's become safely Democratic. And the current representative is a Democrat who is a moderate Democrat who will have no issue holding the seat. The fourth is this suburban portion of St. Paul area, along with this portion of all of Ramsey County, plus this suburban county over, I believe it's Washington County, a good portion of it. It's a very Democratic seat. Again, St. Paul is one of the two Democratic strongholds, the Twin Cities. The other is the fifth, which is Minneapolis itself, as well as a few other suburban areas around it, urban areas as well, represented by a Democrat. The sixth is exurban, very, very Republican area. It has been for a while. The seventh is interesting. Was represented for a long time by a Democrat, a blue dog Democrat, despite being the most Republican district in the state. But it was easily flipped in the last cycle, and now it's represented by a Republican. Finally, the eighth is the northern range of Minnesota, as well as some areas around it. Again, it used to be a Democratic stronghold, but since then it's become a Republican-leaning area, and Republicans are really set to benefit from that. I'll go through the members. Jim Hagedorn of Blue Earth, he represents the first. He had a competitive cycle last time, arguably saved by the presence of the Legalize Marijuana Now party, but he's pretty well in tune with the district. Angie Craig is in the second district. She beat Jason Lewis, former representative there in 2016, and then survived 2 cycles since. Although the most recent cycle was surprisingly competitive in the second district. This is very much a competitive seat. It's not a Democratic-leaning seat at this point. The third is only Democratic plus 1. That's a little bit deceptive if you actually look at how it voted. This seat went to Biden by 19 points. So it's not really a Democratic plus 1 seat at this point. It's a very Democratic seat, represented by Dean Phillips, moderate Democrat. Betty McCollum is in the fourth against St. Paul, Democratic stronghold. Democratic district, she's very liberal. Ilhan Omar is in the fifth. She's notorious for being probably the most controversial member of the squad. Mainly due to campaign finance stuff. She actually was the worst performing House candidate relative to the presidential vote. If you look at the 2020 results, she ran substantially behind Biden, double digits, inexcusably bad performance. If Democrats ran like that statewide, they would lose pretty solidly. Tom Emmer is in the sixth, again, the exurban seat. Michelle Fischbach is in the seventh, defeated a longtime incumbent Colin Peterson by a pretty resounding margin. She was his first serious challenger. And then Pete Stauber is in the eighth, and he has a pretty firm lock on that seat. So I'll go ahead and show our maps over here. And the map that I've drawn, that we drew, assumes 8 districts in Michigan or Minnesota. We think it's going to be able to hold on to its 8th district, although it's very much not assured if that would happen. So we drew the map without assumption, and then we redrew accordingly. So this map locks in a 4-4 majority for both parties. I'll go ahead and open it up in Dave's redistricting app as well. But again, to show you the districts, 1 is more Republican here a little bit. It's a Trump plus 7 seat, has Rochester and some of those counties that don't really belong in the second. The second becomes more Democratic. Angie Craig will be quite safe in this. Biden plus 10, really, really Democratic seat. The third as well, Biden plus 20. The fourth, Biden plus 35. Fifth, Biden plus 61. Again, these Twin Cities, very liberal. They're the reason Minnesota is a blue state. The 6th, again, Trump plus 25. 7th is Trump plus 28. And then the 8th is Trump plus 11.6. So very, very Republican districts out there in the rurals. So you'll notice a little bit of change we did here as we drew the 2nd to have only be focused in on these suburbs of Minneapolis, which makes it much more democratic than would previously have been the case. And we also tried to avoid county splits in the rest of the state. So the rest of our maps, Republican gerrymander right here. Do that real quick. Democrats get 2 seats. And a Democratic gerrymander. Republicans get 2 seats. All things considering, pretty reasonable map. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it to Harrison again real quick so we can show his map. And then we'll go to Nick to show his map.
Yep. So here is my Minnesota map. The 2020 numbers actually, I made it with 2016 numbers, but 2020 numbers apparently just got added in, so I updated them here. This map is basically drawn as a Republican gerrymander, which it fails at, given that my 2nd district has dummy mandered thanks to Joe Biden. But it is still a district that a Republican could win. Joe Biden he carried the district by less than a point. And Jason Lewis, in his bid for Senate, won the district by 3 points, and Trump won this district by a lot more in 2016. So this 2nd district on my map, still a lot closer than the real-life 2nd district. So a Republican could very well win this district. The 3rd district is also less Democratic than the current 3rd district. If you look at Biden's performance, I doubt a Republican would be able to win it. But ideally, this map essentially locks in 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 1 seat is a toss-up that essentially decides control of the delegation, whether it be tied or whether there be a majority for the Republicans. So there's that. And I guess if you briefly look at some of the other districts, again, I mean, very safe. My 6th district is more Republican than the current one. I think it's a pretty good example of this is the Senate race. Amy Klobuchar won every district in her 2018 Senate bid, but on my map, she still loses the 6th district by just a small amount, a very small amount on here. And even the 7th district is also more Republican here, so she only wins it by about 0.5% of the vote. So again, it's very, very competitive. As a map overall, kind of dummy mandered, but then again, the goal for me was really to draw something that would probably be 4-4 most of the time. I think this is a better representation of what the map would usually look like. So a slight bias to the Republicans on this map. And also, I'm going to unfortunately have to be heading off now. So thank you guys for having me on, and have a good night.
Yep. Thank you. Yep. And now we'll go to Nick, who will show his map.
Sure. Yeah. So this is. Oh wait, I'm not showing my screen yet. Let me just do that.
Give me just a second. I'm going to put it up for you.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Cool. So this is my current This is my current map. This is 7 districts. It's not. Yeah, I'm not thrilled with it, but it's probably the best that I've done so far. And it's 7 districts. So I'm sort of thinking that Minnesota is more likely than not to lose a district. It's definitely still a possibility. There are some estimates that show it keeping the 8 seat, but I think the most likely outcome is that it loses its 8 seat. And this is my map, and this is by 2020 results. This is actually one of the 6 states that DRA has 2020 results for, which is amazing. I haven't actually updated the populations yet, but I'll get to that at some point. And yeah, I mean, it's similar in a lot of ways to the current map. The first district, I mean, one change that you notice is that the 7th district actually stretches all the way down and takes a lot of that like safe Republican territory. This is Colin Peterson's old district, as Eric said, but he's a goner, and I don't think Democrats can hope to pick up this seat anytime soon.
Yeah,
It's very,
it's a doomed.
very
It's a
stationary.
doomed. It's something that's not going to happen, to put it lightly.
Exactly, yeah, and yeah, first district. First district was interesting because Democrats had like a quite bad night down ballot, and there were some races that they thought they would win, and they ended up losing by a lot. But Minnesota won. It was actually one of the closest races in the cycle. Like,
Mhm.
it was only like I forget his name, but Jim Hagedorn, Dan Fian, that was him. Yeah, Dan Fian actually came like within about 2 points of beating Hagedorn in a rematch. I assumed that he would lose equally or
Yeah.
worse to how he did in 2018, but he did pretty well.
Again, the legal marijuana now candidate may have saved him from that scenario.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then what other one was worth mentioning? The sixth replaces the eighth. This is Pete Stauber's district, and it takes in St. Cloud actually. It's there's not really much else that St. Cloud can go because Tom Emmer's district is annihilated by this map. I think Tom Emmer would have to run in the third district under this map.
Rip.
Third district is pretty safe for Democrats, at least now, like by today's standards. They sort of have a bit of a problem here because this has to move out of the Minneapolis and Paul suburbs some way or another, and that will probably shift the partisan lean towards Republicans. But considering the shift in the area, I don't think it's that competitive. Second is interesting. I sort of made it a wraparound district. Maybe I don't know if that's a great way of doing it, but that's just how I did it. And yeah, fourth and fifth are both safe. Now, something that I find a lot of people do is they make a district which stretches across the whole northern area, which sort of seems like a good idea on paper, but some people are actually opposed to it. There was actually a democratic gerrymander, an attempted democratic gerrymander. It was a proposed map in not democratic, Republican gerrymander in the beginning of the century that was sort of created because the Republicans control the legislature at the time. So they passed a gerrymander through the House, but it was vetoed by the Democratic governor. That had a district that stretched from Duluth on the northern end to the Fargo suburbs.
Yeah, the crucial Duluth to Fargo corridor.
Yeah, exactly. And this was drawn for Colin Peterson. I actually have it right here. This is that's the Democratic one. This is it. And this district was drawn for Colin Peterson because it was a vote thing for him, and they also wanted to protect a Republican incumbent, Chip Kravac. Is it Chip Kravac, or was he the one who represented?
He lost in 2012, but he won, surprisingly beat Jim Oberstar in 2010.
He won in an upset, and Republicans wanted to protect him, so they drew the 7th district for him, but it didn't pass, so he was a goner. But you would have thought that Colin Peterson would have been happy with this map because it would have given him a safe district. He might have even won re-election up to this day, but he was actually against it. He said that it didn't really make much sense because you had a lot of industrial voters on that side and a lot of like agricultural voters on that side, and I think the heritage was very different as well. I know that this area has like a lot of Norwegian Americans, which has a big. I think it might have a big cultural impact, but I'm not sure. But I found it very striking that Colin Peterson said that, and I sort of want to like quickly go over these gerrymander because this is the Democratic proposed map. Something I find funny about this map is that if you look at the 2020 numbers, if you look at how these aged over the decades, this is a 3-5 map for Republicans. This is a 4-4 map for Democrats.
So Democrats overextend on their map and Republicans overextend on their map.
Exactly, yeah. Like Republicans wanted to draw votes in the north so they can limit their gains there. Democrats wanted to create a vote sink in the Minneapolis and Paul area so they can get one of those two districts. But this could, but of course by the end of the decade,
a disaster. They would have lost all of it. They would have lost the majority of seats with a majority of the vote, which is pretty hard to do.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's it
Yep.
for my map. I don't think there's anything else that I need.
Yep. And so, yeah, with that, those are our 3 states for the night. Yeah, thank you guys again for tuning in tonight. We'll be back next week with additional states going through, this redistricting cycle and what's going up ahead. So, really interesting thing to look at. We'll also be keeping you up to date on census developments, on any data that comes out, and other things. I know Nick Morris is writing a lot of articles on the subject. You should pay attention to the website. We'll have stuff out when it breaks. And again, yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. You can see where to find us from our names here. You can find me at DE Cunningham 2. You can find Nick at Tossup Report, and you can find Harrison at HW Lavelle. But yeah, thank you guys again, and we'll see you next week on Redistricting Radar.